Hello and welcome back to the Yoga Well podcast. I'm your host, Chase Bossert. Today I have Celia McCoy with me. She's a longtime practitioner of Vini Yoga and a graduate of the Yoga Well Institute's yoga therapy program and a practicing yoga therapist. Also, quite an accomplished singer. Celia, so nice to have you on today.
Thank you, Chase. It's really nice to be here.
I would like to start by finding out a little bit about your yoga journey. How did you discover yoga and why did you keep practicing?
Yeah. So I discovered yoga sort of by chance. My very first experience with yoga was when I was a teenager. And my mom dragged me along to the gym, and there was this new thing that they were offering. And I maybe did 2 yoga classes, and never went back. I don't think she went back either. And so then fast forward many, many years, my youngest child was about 2.5 years old. I was a young mother, and my sister-in-law asked if I wanted to come join a yoga class. And at that moment in my life, the one thing I was thinking is, oh my God, one night a week where I don't have to do bedtime. Like, sign me up.
I think that's a pretty common access point for a lot of new parents. It's like, actually, I had a little time to myself. Yes, I'm in a class. Yes, I'm talking to I'm sort of around other people, but it was an hour and a half of time that I get to myself. And I think that's such an important theme in yoga because what yoga should do is bring us into contact with ourselves, right? It should, if yoga is working, then we become clearer about what we feel, what we think, what is working in our life and what is not working in our life. And it's so interesting that it takes getting super busy with kids and all these other things to actually get launched on a trajectory where I get brought back into contact with myself.
Absolutely.
So how long did you go to this class?
I went to this class probably about 2 years. And it was a really special class because it was just a group of women that all knew each other. Nobody else came in or out of the class. And the teacher that we had was really attentive to what everybody in the room needed. And so while it wasn't Vini Yoga, I sort of started to experience what it's like to have a teacher who pays attention to what you need. And and this is where I think it gets interesting personally, because it's one of the most important parts of why I stayed with yoga. Maybe 6 months into this class series that we were doing, the teacher started chanting. And it was super simple. It was just Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. But outside of having sung lullabies to my children and outside of, singing in the car, things like that, it was the first time that I had used my voice in many, many years. And that it brought a new level of experience to yoga. It became very clear that it wasn't just about stretching.
Yeah.
When that happened. So
the teacher is chanting and you're call and response, or you're chanting with, or what is the format?
At first we did call and response just to learn it. And then we all just chanted together.
So give us a little background of your singing and your voice and why this is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So all 4 of my parents were musicians. And I was raised with every expectation that I would also be a musician. My father and my stepmother, both opera singers and voice teachers. My mom was a music education teacher, and my stepdad, a school choir director. And so from
That's a lot of music
very,
teachers in your life.
it's so many music teachers, Chase, so many. And they started laying my path out for me at 3 years old when I started playing cello. And gradually over the years, I became more focused on singing. And the idea was that I would go to college, voice major, and then follow in my father's footsteps and be an opera singer.
I see. Were you down with that?
For the most part, I don't think I knew how to not be down with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I had any idea of what choice meant.
Right. Sure.
Yeah, yep. But I was attracted to the drama of it all. I was attracted to the well, let's just say the diva-ness, even though maybe that's not really a word.
Super. Yes.
Hmm.
All right.
Um,
So what happened?
so what happened was 3 months before I was supposed to start college, my mother passed away of liver cancer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, kind of a rough thing to happen when you're 19 years old.
Yeah.
And one thing that I know now for sure is that when you are 19 years old and don't really have a lot of family around you to support you, that it is impossible to grieve, which becomes a really important part of the story when we get to me and yoga later on.
Right. Yeah. You know, our society does not do a good job of grief or grieving, as I know you know. We
Mm-hmm.
um, we barely even talk about death or about loss, and we just want to gloss over it, etc. And I have so much experience with students saying something to the effect of, "Well, it's been a year since loss, whatever, fill in the blank, right? And my family and my friends are now saying to me, aren't you glad that you're through with the grieving process? But honestly, I feel like I can now start the grieving process. Like
Absolutely.
that first year, so much is just digested and comes around that it's it's not even like I can begin the process until some digestion has happened, and now enough time and experiences have gone by that I feel like I can digest it and I can begin grieving, and everybody's telling me, aren't you glad the grieving is over?
Yep, I feel that. Hmm. Absolutely. That matches with my experience.
So 3 months before university, your mom passes and you
Hmm.
go off to university not really having grieved at all and not really having come to terms with what's happened.
Hmm.
This will be interesting. Keep going.
Hmm. Yep, yep. So it just so happens that I ended up attending the same institution that my mother was a professor at. And I walk in, and on the first day, they still have her name on her office door. And, you know, that was a little bit of I guess, a slap in the face. So the whole time that I was there were like constant reminders of my loss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And so over the course of 2 years, I only stayed in the School of Music for 2 years before I bailed. It became progressively more difficult to sing. By the end of my sophomore year, I essentially failed my final exams. They're called juries for vocal performance because nothing worked anymore, and no one knew how to help me. No one knew why nothing worked anymore.
When you say nothing worked anymore, what does that mean?
Um, it means that the ability to sing that I had for my whole life basically went away. Everything in my throat got super tight. I had very little ability to control my breath. And I think that my mind wanted to override all of that by trying to do the most challenging literature I could possibly do. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but minds don't always make a lot of sense.
That's true.
Um,
That is very true. So you were choosing material that was extremely challenging at the same
mhm.
time that um, the mechanisms of how you produce sound were not were becoming more and more unavailable to you. And yeah,
That's correct. Yep.
yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to work well.
Nope, 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 not at all. And so after having that experience of failing and not having any idea why, I just, basically threw up my papers in the air, said, peace out. I'm never doing this again. And then promptly became an English major with a women's studies minor.
There you go. Noble pursuits in
Mm-hmm,
themselves for sure.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so then fast forward, um, you start this yoga class and there's some chanting in it
Yes.
and you're using your voice. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens?
There was a freedom to my voice that had not been there since I was 18 years old. All of a sudden, all of this was open. The restriction that was there before seemingly vanished. It was astounding.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you attribute the difference to?
Well, there's a couple of things. On the most basic level, I attribute the difference to becoming embodied. I, was raised by academics, so everything important happened from here up, and the rest of it didn't matter at all. And so having the experience of being in my body fundamentally changed something. And, to relate back to what you were saying earlier about needing to digest things before any of the grieving process can happen, um, I can see now from my perspective, many years later, that being in my body in that different way started that digestion process.
Right. What kind of time length are we talking? 10 years? 15 years?
At that point in time, it had actually been about 9 years since my mother had passed. So probably 6 years that I hadn't sung at all.
Okay. And then, and that you had this grief just hanging there for 9 years. And then you start the yoga and you start getting in touch with your body and how you're feeling, etc. And then something is shifted in your breathing or in your voice, etc. Okay. So you obviously saw that, and then what happened?
What happened was I got hooked.
You got
Um,
hooked. Okay.
I got
And
hooked.
what does getting hooked look like?
Um, Getting hooked was I knew that yoga was the thing.
Hmm.
And, I probably would have stayed in the yoga class because still, not doing bedtime once a week is pretty spectacular. But having access to my voice again gave
Hmm.
me a whole different level of buy in, or if we want to use our technical term, shraddha, in what yoga could do.
Right.
Um,
Okay. So you did teacher training. What happened?
Yeah. So what happened after that is my teacher at the time asked me, "Have you ever considered being a yoga teacher?" And I said, "No, I have not considered being a yoga teacher." She said,
Hmm.
"Maybe you should consider being a yoga teacher."
Right?
Yep. And so I found a teacher training program. I began teaching probably only about 3 months into my training program.
Sure. Very
Um,
usual.
yep. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. So you started a teacher training program and you started teaching, and you're teaching what kind of classes?
I was teaching a total mishmash of whatever I thought possibly seemed interesting. And as a baby yoga teacher, I associated being a better teacher with teaching the hardest, most complex sequences that one could possibly teach,
Okay.
which
So there's a
isn't,
theme here. Same thing what you're doing with your while you're studying music, you're going for the most difficult, technical, etc. And
yep.
right. Okay. So, and how did that all go? So now you're teaching really difficult asana classes and etc.
Hmm.
Are you
I felt
doing
lost.
difficult? Are you doing difficult asana yourself?
Not really.
Hmm.
Um, because while I have always had a lot of flexibility,
Hmm.
um, my body structure doesn't lend itself to doing a lot of the, fancy pants poses that you see on the covers of magazines, which were, of course, the poses that I should teach.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, this is such a common story in yoga teacher. First one is that, that anybody can teach and that I don't need very much education to start teaching. That unfortunately is a very prevalent mythology in the yoga in North America and the West in general, I think. And there's not, and then that there's a confusion about, well, what is yoga? And yoga, if we're not steeped in the context of what yoga is attempting to pursue and why and etc., then we just will look at it and see movements and body positions. And of course, we know what movements and body positions are. They're strength and flexibility. And so
Mm-hmm.
we should be trying to maximize strength and maximizing flexibility. And off we go. It's really a classic example of what happens when something moves from one culture to another culture, right? So
Yeah.
it moves from the culture of its production to another culture, and in doing so, it gets separated from the roots or foundations of what produced it. And in the new culture, it becomes something completely, totally different. And you know, in the case of yoga coming into the West or coming into North America, you it kind of went in two directions. It went one into this really hardcore physical thing, or another one it went was in terms of spirituality and meditation and all of those things, and not together but two separate things. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that's there's a lot more nuance there as well, but I think this is a really, really common misconception of what yoga is. And people think, if you ask new yoga teachers what is the goal, then, they might be able to say something about enlightenment, which is also a Western idea because in in India, I think a more appropriate term would be independence or liberation, etc. And then, you ask, well, how does the practice of these postures result in enlightenment? And, there's a big gaping hole there. And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
they do.
Mm-hmm.
if,
Stand on your
if,
head for 10 minutes, you'll have the answer.
Right. If you do enough of this, then you won't ask stupid questions. And off we go. Here we go. So, I think that this is, it's really interesting that here's your experience. And so you're lost, and then what?
Um, I kept saying to colleagues, to other teachers that I had had in my teacher training program, I'm like, I just wish that I could have a teacher. I want someone that I can call my teacher because I need to be rooted in something. And it's not so easy to find a teacher, Chase. It's
Are you
it's really
sure?
not. Well, it wasn't so easy for me then. There wasn't anybody who knew what that looked like that I could go
Right.
to, right?
I sorry I have to interrupt again. This is just one of those things about Vinny Yoga, which I think is so special, is that Mr. Deshikachar, the model that he passed on, that he received and that he passed on was one-to-one teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is the um, core of yoga tradition itself is at most small um, group small enough where the teacher had a lot of understanding of the individual and could really pay enough attention to make some things change and be different in for the person, etc. And I think that this is really a key component of what real yoga is that
Yeah.
this personal relationship with someone who also has a personal relationship. Like, I think that's also kind of a thing that happens, is that people want to be the teachers for other students and want to guide their one-on-one things, but they don't go and do it themselves, which is
How does that
just,
even work?
how does that even work? Yeah, like hello. So I think that one of the really key components of Mr. Deshkichar's teaching was everybody has a guide, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets should meet with that guide regularly, and that guide is not there to tell you what to do. The guide is there to help your svadhyaya, help your process of self observation and self awareness. And I mean, it's impossible to overstate the value of that. It's just so fundamental and so impactful on what we do in our lives, let alone in yoga. Yeah. Okay, so you're
Yes.
looking for a teacher.
So I'm looking for a teacher. Um, I sign up for the 300-hour teacher training at the studio that I was teaching at. And
Which is an appropriate response because, if you're feeling lost, well, of course, you want to look for more education and you want to feel like you're getting educated as you go along, and that will
Mhm.
hopefully lift you up out of the kingdom of the lost. And yep, so you
Mhm.
sign up for the 300-hour. Yep.
Yep. And I continued to feel lost um, until I encountered a teacher who practices and teaches through the lens of Vini Yoga. And he included a lot of chanting in his practices, which since I had stopped taking classes with my original teacher, I hadn't had access to. And I also had never experienced chanting within a practice, or chanting
Mm-hmm.
is something that is integrated into the practice as a whole to help with its effect and things like that. And again, it was like a light bulb. Oh, this is what yoga is.
Right.
Like, this is the thing. You know, everything else wasn't the thing. This is the thing.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, there are moments like that go on for decades because what yoga is so broad and so
Mm-hmm.
deep, and there's so much interesting stuff and so many different uh, teachings that something totally changes your whole life, and you're like, oh my God, it's the thing, and then it gets integrated,
Mm-hmm.
and your system is shifted and it's changed, and then something else is there, and it's like, oh my God, this is the thing. Ah! And you go on and you study that, and that gets integrated, and it shifts you and changes you, etc. And it's an ongoing lifelong learning, as I like to say from Mr. Dejagachar. Just what a gift. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
Okay,
this is Kevin Corton, correct?
that's correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
very skilled, wonderful teacher.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I I don't think that I could possibly overstate the pivotal role that he played in my life at that time in my life.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, with
what a beautiful thing to say about somebody, really. I
yeah,
mean,
really.
so meaningful and so
Mm-hmm.
so deep to just be like, I cannot overstate the role he played in my life. And you're basically going, well, what was the relationship?
What was the relationship? Well, I attempted at first in when we were in our 300-hour teacher training to be teacher's pet. I wanted to be the best student. I'm like, I am going to totally integrate all this stuff that you're teaching about Vini Yoga. I am going to, go and research and learn parts of a mantra that you didn't teach us, but I know they're there. Like we learned part of Lagunyasa, and I went and I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn this other verse and I'm going to apply it to the sequence that I'm going to teach for our practicum. And I my overly succeeding part of me was very happy to get the pat on the head for doing the right thing. And so eventually I asked him, I'm like, would you be willing to spend some time with me as my teacher?
I
Mm-hmm.
don't, I think that a lot of people don't even know this is a possible question, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I like this, and what do I do? Well, I go to group classes, or I keep going on, or I sign up for a teacher training that the person is part of, or whatnot, or what. And it doesn't even occur to a lot of people that actually the question is, can you guide my practice?
Yes.
Can I do additional studies with you? Can we
Mm-hmm.
can we just talk about yoga theory, or can we talk about my life, or can we talk about how the two intersect, or I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like we don't even know that that's a possible question.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was a hard question for me to ask because it felt like I was asking for help, um,
Hmm.
which is not something that I've ever been comfortable doing.
Hmm.
So it was like a big, big, giant step out of my comfort zone to do that. And it was the best decision ever.
Fantastic. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
love it.
So I studied with him for a little while, and then I had another one of those, oh, this is the thing moments when you came to the studio that I was teaching at to teach a workshop on, I think it was called like the therapeutic application of the Yoga Sutras or something like that. And I feel like you only taught the first four sutras over the course of a whole weekend. And it was like, this is the thing.
Right.
This is the thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I just want to say another thing, which is that this is so great. I love this. It's so great. It's such a good example of how yoga unfolds and what is possible in it. And,
Hmm.
it is in our culture, yoga has been separated from the context of its production. It has been separated from what generated these practices. And so to actually have the opportunity to engage with some of the ideas and principles which are underlying the practice is
Hmm.
again like life changing, and it's like it's changes your practice, and it changes how you think of the world, and it changes all of these things. And one of the ways to really think about yoga is as a game of perception. Yoga
Hmm.
is primarily interested in changing the way that we experience the world and
Hmm.
indeed experience ourselves. And that is the foundation for changing how we are in the world, the experiences that we have, and the way that we what we can do in the world. Our actions are coming out of our perception, etc. So when we when we uh, start to think about how do I change this, and oh, here's an idea that comes in, it takes some time for this to actually shift us. We can have
Hmm.
aha moments, we can have lightning strikes and thunderclaps, whatever you want however you want to describe it, and it is always gradual implementation. And
Absolutely.
I think that in terms of studying this stuff, it is so important to actually be in it and steep in it. And
Hmm.
and there's different ways to do that, etc. In At the Yoga Well Institute, we try to have our trainings be long. So like the shortest training is a year and a half, and then the therapist training that you completed, etc., is almost 4 years.
Hmm.
And then we have these ongoing philosophy classes where the idea is don't wait until we are at the beginning of a text to start it. Just jump in. Where
Hmm.
you land will be perfect. And it doesn't matter where we are in the text because we spend a lot of time in each class reviewing. Here's where we are. Here's what happened before now. Here's what the big container is. Now here's the smaller container for these ideas. And here's the sutra. And
Hmm.
you can see how it all plays out. And we spend a bunch of time actually like talking about how this idea links to that idea and the other idea and all around, and etc. And so it the most important part of actually going deep in yoga is just staying with it and keeping the ideas fresh and hearing them again and again, and because then we have the possibility of actually succeeding in implementing them. We just
Yes.
hear it one time, then it may
Nothing.
be like profound, but within a few days or a week or maybe a month at
Hmm.
most, it'll be back to life as it was before. So
Yes.
you came and you had some yoga sutras, and this
Hmm.
is another thing about Mr. Deshikachar's teaching. It is so accessible.
Yes.
Yoga sutras are practical. It's also it's
Hmm.
not like all this highfalutin airy fairy philosophy that's like, how do I apply this to my downward dog, let alone to my relationship? It's like, no, no, no. It's super clear from the get go.
Yes.
From the get go, what is actually happening in yoga and how that applies to your life and how that applies to your practice. And I mean, what we receive from him is just gold. It's amazing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And that right there is precisely why it was such an aha moment, because hearing these words from you were the first time they ever made sense. Um, and so, like, oh, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I would really like to continue learning from you. And it just so happened that the yoga therapist training was scheduled to start not long after. And so I signed up, and it really good decision. It was a very good decision to have made.
Right. Yeah. So what happened in yoga therapy training?
What happened in yoga therapy training? And I think this speaks directly to what you were just saying about having these long trainings so that you really have a chance to be immersed in things, is that I had gradual transformation. The little bit of grief that I started to process when I, did my first yoga classes all those years before, um, got a lot more processed. Um,
So what you're
and
saying is you started the yoga therapist training and immediately became very sad.
No, um, these are all background processes.
Yeah.
None of this stuff that was happening was running across the ticker
Yeah.
of my visible or audible internal thoughts. This is all
Yeah.
just stuff was happening unbeknownst to me, and then all at once, one day, I decided, maybe it wouldn't be that bad to try to sing again. It felt really scary. It felt so scary because everything that I associated with singing was either fear, loss, pain, or failure.
Yeah. Don't forget pressure, because I mean, you did have four parents who are all like shepherding you into this glorious career that don't you
Mm-hmm.
fail at.
Yes. Yep. All of the above. But
Okay.
I had a sort of knowing that it was time to try, um, even though it was really scary.
So what'd you do?
I sought out a teacher.
Oh, what a good idea. A voice
Yeah, there's a
teacher.
theme. Yep,
Those
yep.
those are a little bit easier to find maybe than yoga teacher.
Yeah. And she was a spectacular fit. Um, and we worked probably for a year and a half on trying to free up my breathing, trying to make sound in a way that was really free. A big one was trying to break the patterns that I had developed of trying to sing in a way that made me feel like I was doing it the hardest, most advanced way possible. So, in other words, trying to make my voice be other than mine.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sounds like what became the result of the coaching and responses that you had taken on earlier in your life.
Yes. Yep. Totally yoga. You know, like I did some things. I worked with my breath. I worked to develop new patterns that made me more myself.
Right? And then you're singing, you basically were dropping all of this artifices, or you're dropping all kinds of added things, and you were just letting the quality of your voice come through.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Very, very interesting. So keep going. So
Hmm.
then what happened?
I still had a really big fear of failure. Not gonna lie, that's been one of the patterns that has taken me the longest to get rid of. And I know that that comes out of a space of I, the way I was raised, thank God for parents, love them. We wouldn't be who we are today without them, but they will mess you up. They will mess you up. Um, Success was a condition of worth. And I saw my own value in my ability to impress other people and to garner their approval.
Yeah.
And so part of the healing that came with my yoga practice was that I found my intrinsic value and realized that it is not dependent on other people.
What a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is a super big deal. And, one of the first times that you and I met one on one, you had me write down something. And I still have it. I still have it in my desk drawer, but it was something to the tune of that I am amazing just for who I am. That there's nothing else that is needed, but like you are enough. And I found
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And you found it in a experiential way. It wasn't an
Mm-hmm.
idea. It's it's
Exactly.
it's not it's not like something that you're being told or that and or whatever. It's that it's actually it's a being level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because I didn't believe it when you told me to write it down. I didn't believe it. Yep. It took a lot of practice for that to become true to me.
Yeah. 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 It's so interesting. So good.
Yeah.
So at some point you joined a choir.
Yep, I did. I auditioned for the Minnesota Chorale, and we are the symphonic chorus that performs with the Minnesota Orchestra. The reason why I chose to audition for the Minnesota Chorale was because it felt safe. Because the director of the Minnesota Chorale was a very good friend of my mother's, and she was my choir director in university. So I'm like, okay, she knows me. There's less chance of failing because, she's probably going to accept me, probably going to feel like she has to somehow honor my dead mother by um, allowing me into the choir. Of course, I got in on my own merits, but I
Yes.
wasn't sure. I wasn't sure that would be the case at the time.
Yes.
Um, but
Completely
then I
understood.
got to sing again. And this is now, I just wrapped up my fifth season with the Minnesota Chorale. And
Which is a pretty big
I,
deal.
it is a pretty big deal. Yeah. I mean, especially because, there was a couple years in there that there was that whole COVID thing and we couldn't sing.
Yeah.
We did online things, which it
Yeah.
works really well for some things, but it does not work well for choral singing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very hard to align with everybody. And so how does the choir work? Are there lead roles? Or are there things how does that work?
So in some instances, yes, but the way that the Minnesota Chorale works is that there's this entire body of rostered singers. There's probably 250 of us. But then who sings on what project is chosen on a case by case basis. So some people will sing over on this one, other on that one. Some require gigantic groups of singers, some require very small groups
Hmm.
of singers.
Right.
Um, and so my first season, I was rostered to sing the Bach Christmas Oratorio with the Minnesota Orchestra, which required only 30 singers. And it was an honor to be chosen to be in that more elite, I guess, as it were,
Hmm.
group
Hmm.
of singers. But also, I think the really most spectacular part of it is that everyone in the group was a high caliber artist.
Hmm.
And everyone in that select group has done so much practice that when we get together, the ability to create something special happens much more quickly. And then, I think of it kind of as like the way you describe what an advanced practitioner
Hmm.
looks like
Hmm.
in yoga, that you can hold more and more things all at once because you've developed all of these patterns. You've developed the patterns of movement, you've developed the patterns of breathing. All of that is there. So then you can start to pay attention to more subtle things. Um, it's like that with these groups of singers, that all of the foundations are there so that as a group, we more quickly can go into the place of, I can just focus on the director. I can just focus on what she is communicating. And then I can apply that to what I am doing so that we can create something that is greater than the sum of its parts.
Right. Yeah. This is really the mark of an advanced, quote unquote advanced asana practitioner, or pranayama practitioner, is that all of the different pieces that need to get developed have been developed, and the person has the capacity to manage all of these patterns at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can totally see that as you are getting into singing, etc., all there's all kinds of different patterns that have to be developed. And if you're working with other people who have all those patterns, then you can go you can go a lot further very quickly.
Yes.
Super interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like singing is back in a major way in your life.
Oh, it is so back, Jace. It is, um, it is besides my yoga practice, my most fundamental act of self-care. It
Love
is,
it.
yeah. Um, I do not feel any greater joy or connection um, than when I'm a part of ensemble music making.
That's fantastic. That's so
It's,
great.
yeah, it really is.
Well, I want to ask about this fear of failure and what's happening there in your life.
Hmm. Um, you know, I won't say it's gone,
Hmm.
but it is so much less impactful than it ever has been before.
And um, how does that show up when you say it's less impactful? Like, what does that? How do you know, or what does that mean, etc., like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I take more risks.
Hmm.
I have been extremely risk averse for most of my life. I will go out and make really big, sort of life altering choices, like returning to school. I started grad school at the beginning of this last school year. There's some big fear of failure that could be attached to that. But I'm just like,
Hmm.
no, you know what? I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I've been for the last couple of years going into my yearly auditions because we have to re-audition every year. I mean, you don't ever not get back in, but still,
Hmm.
you have to go and you have
Yeah.
to show like what's going on with your voice. Um, I have approached that with an attitude of all I need to do is show up and be myself.
Hmm.
I don't have to get all up in my head about it and try to do something that isn't me. And then because it's not me, there's that fear of failure. Because
Hmm.
it's not, when you just show up as yourself, you can't fail. Like you can't, you know? It,
It's so good.
Mhm.
It's so good. Yeah. You also are assisting in the the Yoga Well Institute's practitioner course, Deepen Your Yoga.
Mhm.
And as part of that, you are choosing things to teach in the program.
Correct.
And you have chosen some rather challenging things to teach. And you have also received some feedback from me, which was not done in a very yogic manner.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And that activated some of those feelings that I have protected myself from for a long time by avoiding opportunities to fail.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But you responded magnificently.
Oh, well, thank you.
You really you have shown your authenticity and been where you are and who you are, and you've gotten right back on the horse and off you go teaching again. It's fantastic.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And teaching is such a part of who I am that getting called out on not having, maybe fulfilled all expectations, or, we could consider
Hmm.
that failing,
Hmm.
um, that's not going to derail me.
Yeah, I have that experience.
Hmm.
And the piece that was really amazing is that you received what I said, and then you came back and said, but I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And I'm sorry that that you have this feedback from me. And I feel really good about how I taught.
Hmm.
And and then that caused me to do reflection and to realize that primarily I was talking about a small thing, and that the rest of it had been really good. And the whole interaction for me was just another confirmation of how far you've come in terms of your the Celia project of arriving back in Celia, and how you have, and the authenticity, and the really the um, courage to be you and to put it out there and in a way that makes sense to you and feels like you, and that even when you got negative feedback from a very important person in your life, i.e. me, that you were not derailed. You were yourself. Really fantastic. So good.
Hmm. And I could not have done any of that without your guidance.
Without the guidance of a teacher.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. You could also, take credit for the skillful application of our
Sure.
values and techniques in the practices that you have created for me. Even though I did the internal work,
That's true.
without you having presented the techniques to me, it most likely would not have happened.
Thank you, Celia. before we conclude, where can people find you and what kind of work are you doing?
Yeah. So I am a practicing yoga therapist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You can go to my website, celiayogatherapy.com. Tons of information on there, maybe too much information. But lots of information about yoga therapy, about sort of what my values are in terms of teaching. I have several blog posts there that could help you to get to know a little bit better how I think about things and approach things. I see people both in person for yoga therapy, and I see people virtually online for yoga therapy as well.
Great. Well, it's been wonderful talking with you today. Thanks so much for sharing your journey. And
Thank you,
I look
Chase.
forward I look forward to seeing what's happening in the future. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks so much, Chase.